I'm not the first person to observe that there's something quite wrong with parenthood in the modern era. New mothers feel exhausted, isolated, and fiercely conflicted about their babies, putting the pressure on fathers to become increasingly domesticated and emasculated, which puts the relationship under strain. There are books and articles analysing this phenomenon and offering advice. Many of them medicalise the strain felt by mothers, using words like depression and anxiety, and emphasising the need for support. Some feminist writers allude to the systemic problems that mothers face, which they think are rooted in misogyny and patriarchy, and asking people to change their ideas and assumptions about motherhood in ways that will destigmatise this or that behaviour. To be honest, after 5 years of making videos decrying the damage done by feminism and the mistakes that feminists often make, I've come back around to thinking that in an odd sort of way they might be right. I'm starting to think that there might actually be a need for something like feminism in the modern world to address these difficulties that are faced by mothers uniquely, and by women who are the people who become mothers. But to explain all of this properly, I want to start at the very beginning. Why is motherhood difficult? Much of human psychology, male and female, is firmly rooted in the fact that human babies are very difficult to raise compared to every other animal in the world. Human babies are born completely helpless and needy, and they take years to reach independence. Motherhood is an extreme investment, unlike anything else in the human experience, and I'm not just saying that to make myself feel special. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that much of our civilization is based around raising children. Our laws, our customs, our buildings, our languages, and our very concept of male and female, man and woman, masculine and feminine, all revolve around the expectation that a man and a woman reproduce and raise children in a safe environment together. And yet, if you talk to people under the age of 30 now, parenthood is somewhat of an alien concept. It's something that happens to other people behind closed doors until it happens to them. I know that's how I saw it a few years ago before I was a mother. I didn't really know anyone who had children, and if I did, I sort of, held the baby for about 30 seconds and thought it was very cute, but I didn't really get to see any of the actual parenting going on. I hardly spent any time with children or anyone that is babies, toddlers, since I was one myself. And they often seemed to be quite noisy and a little bit disgusting. I hated how their hands were always dirty and they had snot coming out of their nose continuously. So when I had our first child, I was sort of just figuring out as I went along, hoping that some deep-rooted maternal instincts would be awakened and help me figure out exactly what to do. And that is sort of what happened, and we managed to muddle through, and it was a very enjoyable experience. But just as the women who write these articles and books observed, it was completely bewildering, it was exhausting, it was very isolating, and there were times when it was just so difficult that I was absolutely baffled that this is the same thing that everyone goes through just to bring life into the world, that this is something that everyone does. It was just so overwhelming. Every day was a roller coaster of intense love and tears and rage and guilt. And although I talked to other mothers who are going through the same thing, I was never really able to become close friends with them to the stage that I could really explain what was going on and find someone who I could really get into it with. I would talk to other mums on a very surface level, sort of chit-chat, and have a vague sense that they probably were going through something similar to me in the emotional sense, but not being able to get into it with them. I think that's where these articles and books come in, where women, when you're writing about something that's going on, it's easier to really pause and think and to properly articulate what is going on in a way that's extremely personal and honest without it being a sort of embarrassing social situation. And these books and articles are very popular with mothers because they're hitting on something that we're all going through but can't really talk about. Something that I almost never see acknowledged is the basic fact that raising babies as humans and as animals is more ancient than even the word ancient would suggest. It's simply been a fact of life for as long as there has been life. And in that sense, motherhood is the most ancient profession there is, even older than the other one. Our ancestors did not have maternity leave. They didn't have milk formula or disposable nappies or indoor plumbing or central heating. They lived in filthy hovels with their entire family often crowded into one bed, sometimes with animals sleeping in the same room as them to keep warm. Why is it that a 35-year-old university graduate can hardly cope with caring for one newborn in a warm, clean house when her ancestors somehow coped with being repeatedly impregnated throughout their fertile years and raising up to 12 children in a filthy one-room shack? I'm not saying that to shame modern women who are having difficulty, and like I said, I've been going through my own difficulties myself. These ancestors and these people who live like this today, they had so little, and yet I think they had something really important that we lack. For women of the past, motherhood was so demanding that they could do nothing but completely integrate it into their lives and throw themselves entirely into parenting. Motherhood was properly integrated into a woman's life instead of being haphazardly piled on top of her existing life. Our ancestors also had a much more integrated religious life. But I'm not going to make this a video about Christianity because I can already hear the people who are clicking unsubscribe and no, stay, please stay. So instead of calling it religion, let's just call it community. They had each other. Before high-speed, convenient transport, people used to live quite near their parents, their brothers, their sisters, their cousins, all within walking distance, or maybe even in the same house. And although many modern people wouldn't dream of moving in with their parents or living with other extended family or their in-laws indeed, there were certain benefits to that we don't get the benefit of these days. Progress isn't just a series of continuous improvements. Every change that is made to our society through technology or through social changes is a trade-off. It's just a fact of life, and I'd say even it's like a physical law of the universe that when you change something, you're going to make something better and you're going to make something worse. And it's often easier beforehand to see the things that you're going to make better than it is to see the side effects of what is going to be lost. And with a lot of social progress, I think what we see is the benefits, and we don't even understand what's been lost until a generation or 2 generations later. Life has become so much safer and more comfortable because of technology, because of economic prosperity. And I can't overstate how much things have improved in those respects and how much that actually is a good thing. But some things have been lost and some things have gotten worse. And we're only now starting to see exactly what that means. Every time I see my 2-year-old playing with a random child she meets at the park, and I get to stand around talking to this random child's mother, I feel that this is something we should be doing for several hours a day instead of just for 20 minutes between playing with her toys at home or watching cartoons. I can't give my daughter everything that she needs in terms of play, in terms of fun. Sitting with me on the carpet and singing nursery rhymes is certainly enriching, but it's not the same thing as roughhousing on the grass with a random kid that she's just met, or with her brothers or sisters or cousins. Modern life can be cruel in some ways, and it's cruel to women, and it's cruel to men, and to children, and to the elderly. Some issues affect everyone equally, or to varying degrees, but many issues are felt uniquely by one of these groups. And I think women and mothers face their own unique issues navigating modern life. And some of those issues are what we might call systemic. And I do cringe a little using that word systemic because it's one of these weasel words that seems to be used all the time these days to just to badger the government into doing something about it, or to to explain away problems that are difficult to define, but I don't really know what other word to use in this context. Our modern lives are simply not set up for parenthood, for motherhood. The buildings that we live in are not set up for families to live in close proximity the way they used to be. Our community spaces are not designed for that. The education system prepares girls not just to work, but for a career by default, and it throws them into a school with a bunch of horny teenage boys and teaches them all how to use birth control, presumably with the expectation that these boys and girls are going to grow up to be young adults who are going to have up to a decade of sleeping around and experiencing everything life has to offer before they eventually get round to settling down and having children at some point. Home ownership is out of reach for many couples in their 20s, and it requires 2 incomes just to save up for a deposit and to get a mortgage. I don't know what else you can call these things except for systemic. And to the extent that there is a need for some advocacy on the behalf of women and mothers, what else can you call it but feminism? It's certainly a different kind of feminism than the one we've come to know. I've been very interested in watching and reading Mary Harrington, who calls herself a reactionary feminist, and Alex Kashuta, who is at least sympathetic to that worldview. But I don't know if reactionary feminism has been solidly defined or how many people even are included under that umbrella. If I were bold enough to attempt to define it without Mary Harrington here to define it herself, I would say that it's a kind of feminism that explicitly acknowledges the differences between men and women in our bodies and our minds and in our roles in society. And it recognizes motherhood as an intrinsic part of womanhood that needs to be properly integrated into women's lives from adolescence upwards or even earlier. But most of all, the reactionary part of reactionary feminism is to recognize that we don't necessarily need modern solutions for these problems, and that these problems were kind of solved by generations that came a long time before us, and that it might be better to look backwards in time to see what they were doing right that we can't get right now. Things like strong family values and communities for supporting women and children. Institutions like marriage that are devalued in modern society and in modern media. And although I started off this channel as somewhat of a libertarian, I think there is a lot that could be done in law to help change social attitudes and that would facilitate having stronger families and supporting women and mothers and children more. Things like educating girls and boys separately, or changing the laws around pornography, or changing the statutory requirements for maternity leave. The way that maternity leave is currently structured, it almost presupposes a certain structure to life where a woman will start her career and then settle down and have a family, presumably, and that she needs to then take a career break that needs to be paid for by her employer and by the government, and then that she will go back to work when she's ready after a year. I just don't think that's very realistic when it comes to motherhood. And I know I'm being a bit cheeky using the word feminist in the title just to get clicks, but I'm not actually going to be calling myself a feminist from now on. I just wanted to give an update on where my ideas have evolved with time. And yes, I'm obviously aware that feminism is responsible for many of these social changes that I'm complaining about in this video. I think that's all I've got time to say today, so thank you very much for watching. Please watch Women's Hour every Friday at 9, or catch up after it's finished. Hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching. It's too sweaty to snap. I can't do it.